If we live in contradiction to God's life, we have no right to be here at all. And to think that we do is to say, hey, I'm just as important as you are, God. I'm like you. I have the right to do whatever I want. And that's pride. Now, I think that most of us are going to have some comfort in knowing that the evil in the world is going to be obliterated, that the rapists are going to be punished, that the strip clubs are all going to be vaporized by the power of God, and that the violence between people all over the world is going to be gone. This is not good, what we're reading about people and what has been happening since the beginning of time. God is going to eliminate every bit of that. All because these things make Him angry, because they are in contradiction to who He is and His holiness. He is not tolerant of it. He is telling us this will end. The fact that you don't see some of it ending right now is just because you're caught in part of the process. So the author gets down starting at verse 7. There's some good news and some bad news. There's good news for those who trust in Him, bad news to those who do not. Those who plot against the Lord, He will bring to an end. Trouble will not come a second time, meaning through this people to the nation of Israel. He's going to end Nineveh's persecution of the people of Israel. He goes down and says that this is His judgment, that He's going to judge, and then gets down to chapter 2 and says, an attacker advances against you, Nineveh. And then we end up in this strange spot where we understand that the way that God is going to accomplish this judgment is through a third party, which is the armies of Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar. This army is going to come in and obliterate Nineveh. So when you're actually reading the details of what's going to happen, it's not God actually doing this Himself, which might help you deal with it a little bit more, because some of it's pretty graphic, violent. But to understand that it is actually the Babylonians who are going to come in and actually do these things to Nineveh. So you think, okay, that sort of takes it out of God's hands in one sense, but He's still taking responsibility for the judgment. So then we're left with this other dilemma. Does a good and perfect God use sinful people to achieve His end in the world? And how can He do that and still be a perfect and holy God? Well, the answer to that is yes, He does. Or in some sense, none of us could do anything for God, because all of us are, on some level, sinful people. Even those of us who have been cleansed by the work of Christ, we are all people who sin. And so God, and part of the incredible picture of this big tapestry of human history, has woven together all these imperfect strands to accomplish His perfect end. Is an amazing picture. And that includes all of us. If you read the graphic details of this and they seem rough to you, understand that what God has basically done here, people, is He's unleashed a wild animal in the form of Babylon on these people in Assyria. And that's what the details of this judgment are really all about. But it's not so much God acting directly as it is this principle that God has built into the world. And we have a lot of names. There's a lot of names for this principle. One thing that we say in contemporary times is what goes around comes around. So if you live a certain way and you act a certain way, to one degree or another, you're going to deal with the consequences of that, whether good or bad, in your life. That there is a natural response to the actions of your life in how life comes back to you. Some people in the world call this karma. People struggle all over the world to come up with a name for what everyone has an experience of. How you live your life, how it comes back to you. Jesus called this sowing and reaping. As you sow, so shall you reap. In technology, there's a term GIGO, G-I-G-O, garbage in, garbage out. When you put garbage into a system, that's what you get back out. The machines don't take garbage and somehow turn out something that's better than that. So therefore, if you want something good out, you have to put it in. You have to have good data to get a good result. It's a natural principle, people, and it is true because the one who made the universe built it on a moral framework. And it's woven all through reality, all through the universe. God's handprints over everything. And He made a system so that, generally speaking, how you live is going to come back to you. And that is exactly what we're reading about here with the judgment on Assyria, on Nineveh. They have lived an evil life, a violent life. Those results are coming back to them. Now, I don't know exactly what's in Nebuchadnezzar's mind as he's bringing his armies in to wipe out the Assyrians, but I'm guessing at least this much is happening to him. One, this is a very, very wealthy nation that we're going in to destroy. And he's thinking, because they've plundered all these other nations, they're wealthier than anyone. Therefore, we're going to attack them. See, if they hadn't plundered all those nations, they wouldn't have been that target. And on some level, he knows what they're all about. He has to feel some moral justification in his mind to go in and do to them what they did to everyone else. So in other words, they sowed the seeds of their own destruction. So God didn't want these people destroyed. I mean, God wanted them to repent. I mean, that was the ministry, the ministry of Jonah. And God doesn't want anybody to be destroyed. But people choose the path of their destiny in how they respond to Him and how they envision Him and picture Him. So then the author goes on here in chapter 3 and talks through the reasons for Nineveh's destruction. And I've wrapped these up in 3 basic categories, just so that we can get through this quickly. The first, in the first 4 verses, is about their violence. Woe to the city of blood. We don't need to go through this in detail because we understand it and we see it in the world all around us. We see violence all around us. Quite likely we want no part in violence. We're happy to hear that God is against violence. God does not like abuse. God does not like the abuse of human beings. It is not our prerogative, again, to take lives, innocent lives. We're created in God's image. As a general rule, human life is to be respected and cherished. This is an affront to God how these people have treated other human beings. That's one, violent aggression. And typical of our world. Second category, starting in verse 5, it is immorality and idolatry. I'm against you, declares the Lord Almighty. I will lift your skirts over your face. I will show the nations your nakedness and the kingdoms your shame. Shame, very, very strong term in ancient Near Eastern culture. They have dishonor through their sexual immorality. When I tell you that the temple of Ishtar in Nineveh had prostitutes for the purpose of engaging in worship of the goddess, I'm sure I'm explaining something to you which will help you envision how wicked and contrary to God's purposes these people were. And it's not just the idolatry, but also the fact that the world has taken the sexual immorality and put it in the place of focus on Him. So these are really wound up with one another, immorality and idolatry. God is going to expose that through their judgment, how wrong that this is. Third step, starting in verse 8, pride. Are you better than Thebes, situated on the Nile? See, Nineveh believes they can't be touched. They believe that they are too powerful to be destroyed. Which is silly, the prophet is saying here, because all they have to do is think of another culture that they took over, Thebes, who also thought they couldn't be touched. If they just think of that, they'll realize that they're deluding themselves if they think that they can't be touched. Power is a lie. It causes people to value themselves incorrectly. It causes people to think that they are above criticism. One of the keys for me when I'm detecting pride in my own life or in someone else's life is when I hear the phrase or I utter the phrase, I don't care what anyone else thinks. When I start to say that, or when I hear someone say that, right away I'm realizing there's a pride issue. Because we don't want accountability on some level. We want this sense of, hey, I can do whatever I want and I'm not worried about it. And this is just the beginning of the fall. And we'll talk about pride a little bit more because it's something that we're going to look at in Obadiah that's a little bit closer even to home for Christians. But it's not just the world's sin. It's a sin of all people. And then finally the book ends in verse 19. Nothing can heal you. Your wound is fatal. In other words, this is a verdict. It's all over. All who hear the news about you clap their hands